Hey there, thank you for tuning into Duckbricks, and welcome to another Bionicle Fanon review, where I review the fan-created, canonized Bionicle models. These are not official sets, but instead have been officially inducted into the Bionicle Generation 1 storyline, either via official LEGO contests like the Dark Hunter or Rahi contest from '05, or the TTV canonization contests, which are currently ongoing and overseen by Greg Farsky, the herald of the Bionicle Generation 1 storyline. Today's topic is a Dark Hunter named Darkness. That's literally his code name, Darkness. He is supposed to be a shadow to the Shadowed One. Essentially, he lurks in the darkness, listening in, waiting to pounce on the Shadowed One just in case he slips up. Essentially, he's a deterrent for the Shadowed One and a motivation for him to continually being on the top of his game. Because if he isn't, then Darkness will pounce on him and essentially take his place as the leader of the Dark Hunters. It's a very brutal system, but one that the Shadowed One devised himself to ensure that he never went soft. So it's a very interesting backstory for this character. But moving on from the backstory, I'm going to describe the 4 key points in which I review these models. Number 1 is posability, so can I get this into good poses without it falling over? Can it support the weight of its own hands or weapons? And generally, are there any stability issues, or can I actually pose it well? Number 2 is building techniques. This goes hand in hand with the previous point, but building techniques also covers the fact that, is this recycling anything from existing Bionicle sets, or is it trying new things with new pieces, and am I impressed by the piece usages or different building techniques used for different aspects of this model? Number 3 is general aesthetics, so story aside, does this look good, can it get into good poses, and am I generally happy with the way that it looks overall? And number 4 is believability in universe. So compared against representative samples, does this make sense as a part of the G1 Bionicle storyline? And if not, what sets it apart? So without further ado, with that all aside, let's just dive right into this Dark Hunter, Darkness. Alright, so here we have the Dark Hunter, Darkness. Let's do a quick manual turnaround just so you can see the model from all sorts of different angles. You may immediately see that it's kind of wobbling a little bit. Not the most stable of models here, as per usual with many of the Dark Hunters, but it does have some interesting things going on, some unique stuff, just can't really hold up its own weight whatsoever, so that's kind of what I'm getting used to with many of these Dark Hunter reviews, is that many of them have issues in the posability and stability department. And look, his leg just fell off. So let's just start off with the first point here, which is posability. Now, this one is honestly not great. I have seen worse. I don't think you can really get worse than the Dark Hunter Gladiator, for example, which literally cannot stand unless you actually hold him up. But this one isn't much better, to be honest. You see, the big issue with the way that this one poses is that if we get the arm out of the way here, the legs are just mounted on one single ball joint, and that itself is just connected by a single Technic axle. So you can see it's super easy for this to actually separate from the body and for the leg to literally fall off while you're posing. It's not really helped by the fact that there's a lot of clutter going on around the legs that kind of force it apart if you try to angle them in certain areas, like the gear here and whatnot. They do help in terms of greebling, but they also do hinder the movement and make it so that if you try to really bend this outwards, you're actually going to be wiggling it out of the socket. It's actually surprisingly easier than it looks to just have this piece fall right out. Beyond that, if you actually look at the way that this poses, it's just kind of awkward and gangly. You can see that I guess the look that it was going for was that it has these really long legs and long limbs, almost like a nightmarish creature in shadow, so I do appreciate that to an extent. I think that it works in some aspects for this model, but it's just so hard to pose well, and all of the poses that it does make are honestly really awkward unless you put a lot of effort into it, mostly because of the fact that it doesn't have enough weight to hold up its hands whatsoever either. But let's just look at it point by point in terms of posability here, starting off with the legs. I'm going to try to get the arms out of the way, but they just keep on flopping down. But the legs here, oh, there goes another leg. Let's just put them down while I showcase the legs here, because honestly, this is probably the easiest way to demonstrate posability, is literally just by separating the legs from the body. So
You can see he has multiple degrees of motion in his leg, although it is somewhat limited. You really can only move this back and forth this much because it's actually using a pretty interesting technique of mounting the feet piece on a metru head here. That's actually a pretty unique technique, I will have to say. And of course, I think the big problem with this foot is that it's not a very stable one. If we place the foot on a flat surface like this, it's really only touching on the 3 tips of the Onua claws and the back of the Gali Mata hooks here. Of course, when you're moving it around, these hooks can also fold inwards, and then you don't have a stable surface at all. You really have to kind of fiddle with it to make it work. Aesthetically, I think it looks kind of cool how the claws are like this, and you can very easily see this maybe perched on a rafter or something, watching the shadowed one, but just on a flat surface on the ground, this doesn't work out too well. You've got a Toa Metru foot piece here for armor, but honestly it's kind of wobbly, kind of an awkward technique how it's just stuck on there and it's literally only being held in by 2 standard Technic pins, just keeping it from being rotated all the way across. Standard black Rakshi limb piece here, so that's all right. And then we have a Toa Mata foot, which is attached to these inexplicable ball joint sockets here. I guess this is supposed to provide some depth to the back of the leg. And then it, of course, attaches on just this one pin, which is very easy to come out, as you just saw. Reattaching the leg here, I mean, let's just try to get this stood up in some sort of a pose, and it is not looking well. You can immediately already see that some of the feet claw pieces are just bending the wrong way. You kind of have to manually go in, bend that out, make sure that's all good. So once you actually got this somewhat standing, well, oh boy, there goes one of the other legs has fallen off again. Yeah, this one's a little bit tough in terms of the standing up department. Let's just say you've got this standing in some sort of a pose. Okay, we got it standing up. And then you'll notice the big issue with actually trying to pose the legs here is that the way that it's mounted is that these are mounted flush against a flat Technic surface. If I can get the arm out of the way, if you notice the socket here for the upper leg is just mounted flush against it. So if you try to bend the leg any way that's not out or back and forth, it will just start to pull away from the axle, really accentuating the fact that the legs are really easy to fall off. Just observe what happens when I actually try to rotate this leg this way. You'll notice it starts to pull out of the socket and then it just comes right off. It's really not that great of a system because it's just flush against here. Honestly, I think a really easy way to fix this is just to attach the axle on this bottom pin here, make the axle stick out a little bit further, and then you have the legs mounted at a little bit of a distance away from the body so that when you actually try to rotate them, they don't just pop off like the legs are going to do when you do this. Legs are just gonna pop right off. So really kind of not a great system here, the way the legs are attached, and one that was very easily avoidable too. So that's not a major good thing in my opinion. Definitely could have been fixed in a very easy way to allow it to actually pose without the legs just falling off. Of course, it doesn't fix all the stability issues of having so many ball joints that really don't add too much other than making it, I guess, a little bit taller, but there are better ways to make a creature taller than just literally sticking limbs onto it. So not the best of solutions here in my opinion. And then moving up to the arms, and the arms also are quite long and lanky, and it definitely does a lot in terms of making this have its own unique look and feel. When it's standing up straight, I feel like this is almost bird-like, or maybe it's some sort of a strangely proportioned creature. The claws reach all the way down to the feet, so that's not necessarily a con. I can definitely go for the unique aesthetic. One thing that I don't like though is that you can't pose the arms whatsoever. The arms, yeah, they're just gonna fall down. Sure, your mileage may vary when using certain parts and certain sockets. Maybe these sockets are a bit older than maybe the ones that you may have in your collection. So if you were to build this on your own, maybe it doesn't have as bad of these problems, but you can kind of see that the weight of the arms just really make it have these stability issues. Even if you try to move it upwards at this point, nope, that's not gonna work. That's just gonna flop down. And this one, nope, kind of the same problem here. This segment is a little bit better in terms of moving around. This one is not. So again, your mileage will vary when trying to position the arms, but it is a big con just having them be so long and lanky and making them so unstable when you try to move them around. The other thing is that the claws, very unfortunately, cannot open. They are literally fixed in this position. So you can't even have a pose where, say, this character is trying to grab something or reach out and scratch something. No, your claws are just permanently closed in this position. He can't open his claws without flexing the axles there. So I feel like that's a big missed opportunity to have this in maybe some more dynamic poses, to actually have, if you were to say, remove the claw here, have certain claws be angled certain ways maybe. They could have done something a little bit different like this, for example. Don't really know why they made it so fixed and rigid like this, because there are a dozen other ways you could have attached the claws to end up looking like this when they're closed, but actually let them open. Just feels like a bit of an amateurish technique to me. Of course, though, it does kind of make up for that by having the extra articulation on the back here. You've got these back striking claws, which thankfully are completely articulatable. You can really move these around. They're almost like the main weapons to me, because you can actually do stuff with them, angle them in different ways, and have them be striking attacks like so. It actually does look pretty good on the back here, despite being very, very simple, just Rockshi limbs. So I do actually appreciate that. And then he also has this tail on the back of his body here, some sort of an appendage that's sticking out. It's also very, very simple. It's the simplest tail you could possibly imagine. Literally just Rockshi points sticking out from each other. There goes his other leg again. Just fell off by me moving the model around. But anyways, you've got this tail on the back here, and it is also very simple. I probably would have preferred if they used a different claw piece here. Maybe if they used one of the other claw pieces like this one here, you could have some visual consistency, but it's still nice to get some sort of a tail. You can swing it back and forth, deal some extra damage with that. So I guess that does give you a little bit more in terms of posability. The one other major con in terms of posability, though, is that this model has something in common with many of the early Bionicle models. You see, his head cannot move. That's right, the head is literally fixed in a straight position. And again, I feel like there could have been a dozen other ways to actually try to give this articulation. I can think of several ways right off the top of my head that you could actually have mounted it at this exact height, but have it be able to move around. But no, they opted for a fixed position right here. The only way I'm getting any motion out of this is by flexing the Technic beam, so you're really not supposed to do that. But yeah, you can't move his head whatsoever. Doesn't move up, doesn't move down. It's literally fixed on a Technic axle right here. So that really does feel like it's super, super simple to me. If you had all the parts from Bionicle available to you from 2001 to 2005, I feel like I probably would have expected something a little bit better in terms of the head. Obviously, they actually literally use the Metru head pieces as feet. So it's not like they didn't have the pieces. They just, for whatever reason, chose to make the head fixed, which definitely feels like a major missed opportunity to me. But I think at that point, we can probably move away from posability. I've basically addressed all that there is to address for posability for this model, and start to take a look at building techniques. Now, I don't want to rag on this model too hard, because it very obviously was designed by, oh, there goes his leg, designed by a child, but I mean, I still have to judge it fairly and in comparison to the other Dark Hunters. So I will have to say that the building techniques for this model are not spectacular. First of all, it's not even attached really on the front. I mean, you basically have it so that this entire piece, if you, let me try to get this, let me just remove this arm here so we can get it in a good position to show the camera here. If you notice, this entire leg piece, or the segment that's holding the legs on, is wobbling compared to the front of the torso. And that's because it's not really attached all too well. It's only attached by some friction in between axles here. It's not actually fully adhered. So you got a lot of flex and wobble when you move this around, just making it feel very unstable as a whole. Also contributing to, there the legs just fell right off by me just wobbling this around. Really not a great building technique here. And basically the way this is built is just by stacking Rockshi torsos over and over again. So if you look right here from the underside, this is just Rockshi torso, another Rockshi torso, two more Rockshi torsos up at the top. It's kind of a very basic way to build a torso. There's really nothing crazy going on here. It honestly looks more complicated than it actually is, because you've got all these other Technic connectors sticking around the sides here. If you notice, you've got these Technic connectors here, you've got a gear here, But those ultimately do nothing and don't attach to anything. They're literally just there to fill in the gaps. And then you have a very, very awkward technique on the front here. If you notice when I remove the second armor piece here, there are these two awkward Technic pins that don't attach to anything. Well, that's to prevent the front armor from flexing back and forth because it's just mounted on a pin and not an axle. So if you notice, when you put the armor on here, it's literally just being held in straight by those two Technic pins up at the front. Just such an awkward building technique, really makes it feel unfinished by having those pins stick up at the front. And then of course, when you look at the front chest piece of this model as a whole, honestly, it doesn't really feel too symmetrical to me. You just have a full armor piece that ends here, and you have a second full armor piece that ends here. It's very, very obvious that these armor pieces were taken from Toa Nuva that are definitely not at this scale, and it's basically just been layered here to provide some semblance of a scale. So, not a huge fan of the way that these are mounted. The one thing I will say that I can say nice about the building techniques are the use of the Mata feet here as shoulder pads. For as simple as the rest of this model is, I think these actually work out pretty well, give it some depth to the chest area here, actually make it feel like it's building up to something rather than building up and then stopping and then building up again. So I actually do appreciate the use of the Mata feet here, and the way that the arms are attached aren't too bad. It's not like they hamper articulation too much, it's just that the arms themselves are too heavy to even do anything. And then moving on to the back here, you can kind of see that, sure, there were some attempts to make this seem a little bit armored up in the back, or at least detailed up. Again, the gear pieces here did not need to be included, but it is nice that there was at least some effort being put into detailing. Oh wait, no, hold on a second. The gears were not here to add detail. The gears are literally here to prevent the tail from moving outwards too much. If you look at the thickness of the gears, it's just enough to push against the legs such that the tail doesn't wiggle too far out from what it's supposed to be. Specifically, this piece holding in the tail doesn't get rotated completely outwards. And then these gear pieces just interfere with the leg movement and cause the legs to fall out super easily. So I can't even really congratulate this model on the gear placement here. Sure, it adds some detail, but they're literally just there to prevent the tail from wiggling too much back and forth. And honestly, that's kind of cheap to me. I feel like that's definitely not the best use of pieces here, especially because it actually hampers the leg articulation and makes it easier for the legs to fall off. You've also got these awkward Technic beams that go up a little bit too long in the back here. They don't really lead to anything. There's no armor piece in the back that has this all covered up. So all in all, this just kind of feels a little bit awkward to me. And even though there were some attempts at armoring up along the sides, like using the Throwbots piece here to attach onto the standard, I guess this is the Vizirac limb, the Throwbots limb here, it's not really that great of an armor piece. It really just feels like the back side of it is very hollow. So honestly, I'm gonna be honest, not too impressed by the building techniques of this model either. But then I think we can move on and take a look at this model in terms of aesthetics. Now, I actually will probably be a little bit more positive on aesthetics on this than you may expect. Obviously, this review has been pretty negative so far, and I'm definitely trying to find the positives in a model like this. And I think that's where aesthetics comes in, because yes, it looks really weird and long and lanky, but I think that's part of the appeal of this character. It's definitely kind of a mysterious character. He definitely gives off a vibe of having some mystery around him, and it really does achieve that look of an alien creature. This definitely looks like something that is not like your standard Toa, not even like your standard Dark Hunter or whatnot. It's just the really long, multi-jointed limbs here. Again, you've got really long, multi-jointed legs. I don't know if that was the builder trying to give it extra height and just doing it in a very amateurish way, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that maybe they were trying to give him multi-jointed limbs and legs, not just to make them longer, but to actually give him a very distinct look and feel when compared to the other Dark Hunters. Add to the fact that you've got these appendages sticking out of the back, you've got a full tail going along the backside, and I will say that this is a very interesting depiction of a creature in the Bionicle universe that appears to be very different from the rest of the other inhabitants of the world. So I will give it that. It definitely looks very unique. It looks different. And there were some things in aesthetics that I did like the claws on the feet I think are done pretty well in terms of making this stand out, look pretty menacing with the clawed feet despite not being very stable. You've got the full tail in the back, which is nice, although I do wish that was the same piece as the claws. Color scheme as well is remarkably consistent. They really stuck to the name Darkness and basically made it be just black, dark gray, pearl dark gray. Really, those are the only colors you're going to see other than silver specifically for the claws. So the color scheme is actually a lot better than I would have imagined. It's very, very concise and consistent here, so I do actually appreciate the color scheme in terms of aesthetics here. Yeah, it's not perfect. The back in particular looks really awkward, and the front of the torso, the way that it's aligned such that this slopes up, ends, slopes up, and then goes out, feels very awkward to me. But I can see some positives in the aesthetics here as well. But now I think is a good time to move away from the close-up of this model and start to take a look at how this looks compared to other representative samples in the universe. Let's go.
Alright, so zooming out, we have the Dark Hunter Darkness alongside the Shadowed One, which of course is closely tied to his backstory of being the one to usurp the Shadowed One should he ever show weakness. And we also have him next to another random Dark Hunter approximately the height of an Anika build, which is the Dark Hunter Gatherer. So you can see that he scales pretty well next to them. Darkness has been said to be one of the most powerful Dark Hunters and can kill the Shadowed One. He basically has the power to kill him, so I can definitely see that maybe happening. They're about the same scale. You could probably see that this guy would be lurking behind the Shadowed One, just waiting to strike. So in terms of physical size comparisons, he definitely scales well next to other builds, and especially other Dark Hunters. He's about the same height as some of them, despite having very strange proportions compared to the rest of them. In terms of just other factors in which this is believable in the universe, I think it does kind of fit in generally well. Of course, the stature is very, very strange for a Bionicle character. He's got really long arms, really long and triple jointed legs, triple jointed arms, these other appendages going up, so it definitely feels alien, but it's also said that Darkness can basically slither through any crack or any dark crevasse he can kind of slip through, so I can definitely see it with this build, having the limbs be so skinny. It's really a very skinny character in general. The main image that you can see on the Dark Hunters book and the Biosector 01 wiki is actually deceptive in the fact that it actually looks like he has a little bit more bulk than he does. When he's standing up perfectly straight, he is a very skinny character, so I can definitely see how the proportions will play into his backstory there. And all in all, I'm generally happy with the way that this fits in the universe. Nothing really else I would change, and one of the downside of the building techniques is that it uses a lot of stuff from sets, but that makes it feel a lot more believable in universe. So I'm going to give Darkness a 9 out of 10 in terms of believability in universe. This definitely feels like a character that fits well in the Bionicle world, and he does scale very well next to some of the other Dark Hunters, particularly the Shadowed One. Of course, the one thing that throws me off a little bit, just putting the focus back on Darkness here, is that his head is, well, wearing the Kanohi Krakan, the Mask of Shadows. Obviously, in canon, he does not wear this, so I guess this is just supposed to be his face, although it doesn't really make too much sense to me how his face is just so similar to one of the rarest masks out there. One of the kind of strange things that sometimes I don't like too much about the fan-created designs is that they use the Krakan a lot. They use a lot of the legendary and great masks and stuff that really only belongs to particular characters, and they just reuse them because they're special pieces, but it doesn't really make sense in universe that he'd be wearing the Mask of Shadows, because of course he is not wearing it in universe. So that's why it's a 9 out of 10. Almost everything else is just fine in the world. It's just that one detail that throws me off a little bit. But then we can probably move on to the other points, starting off with posability. Posability is definitely going to be a really rough one to me. Not only can you actually not be able to stand him up straight without him falling over, this is something that took a very long time for me to get him to stand up, but his legs will just fall off if you bend them the wrong way. The way that certain pieces are aligned on the torso actually make it easier and facilitate the legs falling off. His claws cannot open, they're forever fixed in a closed position. He can't really move his arms without them flopping down, And all in all, there's just kind of awkward stuff posability-wise, so unfortunately this one's gonna get a 3 out of 10 in terms of posability. It is one of the worst ones that can actually stand up. I mean, it is physically possible to make it stand up, but it's really, really tough, and it's definitely not worse than some of the other ones that literally just keep on falling over, but it's not nearly one of the better ones either, so definitely a low score on posability. Moving on to building techniques. This one, unfortunately, is another one that I think takes a bit of a low score because, again, it's just recycling stuff from the sets and awkwardly slapping together pieces where I don't feel like they really fit. For instance, the back of the tail and the back blades here are literally just Rockshi legs extended outwards. You've got some kind of interesting stuff going on, I guess, with the upper legs, but even that just feels very awkward with 4 Mata hands stacked together on the back of the leg there. And then you've got the arms, which are just pieces stuck together. Really no ingenuity going into the way the limbs are constructed. There's also some stuff like the torso, which is kind of wobbly, as I demonstrated. You've just got the Rockshi torso stacked together. Really nothing too innovative, and even the use of the 2 Nuva torsos here really do feel awkward and out of place, having this one curve upwards and then stop, go back in, and then curve outwards again. So all in all, I think I'm going to give building techniques a 4 out of 10. It's really, really basic. It's very clearly built by just a child, just slapping together Bionicle pieces to see what sticks. So it is a little bit of a shame that basically the second most powerful Dark Hunter, or some would argue the most powerful Dark Hunter, has such a weak build in comparison. And then moving on to the final point, aesthetics. As I said before, I'm a little more positive on aesthetics than I am for the other 2 points. I'm probably going to give aesthetics a 7 out of 10 just because I really do think that this sells me on the fact that this is a long, lanky character. It's really got these alien proportions, triple jointedness that actually does lend to its favor, and the color scheme for what it is very consistent. Despite being the standard black and gray and silver, it actually distributes the color in a generally good way across the entire build. So with that, I think we've about summed up all there is to say about the Dark Hunter Darkness here. Honestly, not one of my favorite ones. You can't move his head, he keeps falling over, the limbs are falling apart. But if you can get him into a good pose and maybe Photoshop a few things here and there, or actually get him to bend, I've yet to be able to replicate the pose that he's in the book, which is probably the best pose you can get him in. It's not a bad model aesthetically speaking. It just kind of falls apart under close inspection. Still though, it is nice to have one more Dark Hunter in my collection, and especially one with such story significance as this one, being the literal shadow to the Shadowed One. But that's it for this video. Let me know down in the comments below if you enjoyed this review. Do you agree or disagree with my rankings? And if any of you have built this yourselves, what do you think of this model? Also, let me know what you want to see reviewed next, and as usual, unless otherwise stated, check out a brand new Bionicle Fanon review hitting this channel every single Monday. Thank you all for tuning in, and stay tuned to Duckbricks for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, analyses, and much, much more coming your way very soon. Thank you so much, and bye-bye for now.